Okay.
All right. If you don't mind hitting continue, we are going to be recording today's session. I think you were asking your permission, so thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anna Swardensky, and I'm with CADRE, which stands for Collaborating Agencies Disaster Relief Effort. We are the local VOAD in Santa Clara County, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session on disaster donations management. For those of you who are new in joining us in this community preparedness series, this is a part of a funded series for the South Bay hub of Santa Clara, Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Benito counties that is funded by what's called the Bay Area UASI, stands for Urban Area Securities Initiative, and that is basically Homeland Security dollars that are funding these sessions. So with that, we're going to get underway, and with our, whoops, went too far, our welcome and introductions. I had asked if you wouldn't mind if you could type in the chat box for us your name and organization, and let us know if you have a specific responsibility or connection to today's topic of donations management that could be interesting for us and for our speakers to hear about. And then if you wouldn't mind changing your screen name, I see some of you have done that, to your first name and your preferred pronouns and your name of your organization. So for me, it says Anna and Cadre, and I need to put my pronouns in there, but I haven't done that. I'll do that in a moment. I see Nathan's done that, Calissa. So if you could do that, that helps us all get a little bit acquainted with one another. And I'm trying to open my chat window so I can see you guys if anything's happening there. Perfect. And so why are we here today? We are here, this is the 6th session in our South Bay series of workshops, and we are recording this session. I want to call your attention to one other housekeeping detail. In the upper left corner of your Zoom window, you might see a notation that says Otter or Live with Otter AI. We are offering live transcription for today's session, and all you need to do is press on the down arrow and say view live transcription. It'll open up another browser window on your computer, and you can follow along with the printed transcription if that is something supplemental that would help you in participating in today's session. So we would like you to turn your video cameras on if you're comfortable doing so. It's always a little bit nicer to see people's faces and maybe wave at you or see a clapping of the hands or whatnot. So if you don't mind turning on your video feed, we would appreciate that. We also know that sometimes Wi-Fi connections are a little unstable. So if you need to stay off camera, we understand. Okay, and some of you are still eating lunch, absolutely okay as well. So you're done with lunch. Thank you for joining us. Okay, moving forward, what is today's session objectives? We're here today to talk about the topic of disaster management, to explore the challenges, the benefits, the opportunities that exist in the world of disaster donations management. Look at lessons learned from both current and past disasters, and hear from a couple of our speakers today from their years of experience and wisdom that they'd like to share with us here in our South Bay community. So the way we have designed today's program, we had our welcome and introduction slide, why we're here. I'm going to turn it over in just a few moments to our lead speaker to kind of set the stage for us. We'll have some time to talk about who on today's call is working in this arena of disaster donations management, and just kind of talk with one another. We're a small enough group that we do want this to be as interactive as possible. We've asked our first speaker to share as much of her wisdom as she can in the first 45 minutes or so. So please actively use the chat box feature if Charlene says something and you have a particular question about it, but we will also have a Q&A segment a little bit later. Some final pearls of wisdom and a few requests from me as the host of today's session around participant evaluations and our closing remarks. So that's what we have for you today. And let's go ahead and get underway with why you logged in. So today we are extremely pleased to have with us really the foremost experts on volunteer management in the country, and someone that I've personally known for quite a number of years. Her name is Charlene Sargent. You see her on your screen. And let me give you a little background or a little introduction for Charlene. She joined Adventist Community Services Disaster Response as a volunteer in 1999. She's been the director of the Pacific region since 2004 and has served as the interim director and assistant director for North America. Charlene currently serves on the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, otherwise known as VOAD. She serves on the board of directors for National VOAD. She's the chair of Kern County's VOAD and Southern California VOAD, as well as the vice chair of our state VOAD association. That's a lot of hats, Charlene. And she served as the chair of the National VOAD Donations Management Committee and the secretary for the National VOAD Mass Care Committee. So she is a wealth of information for all of us on this topic. And want to give a hearty welcome to Charlene and turn it over to her for her segment.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I'm very happy to be with you, and I'm going to share my screen here, I believe. Okay. If it's going to respond to me. There. You should be seeing my screen now.
Yes, we are.
Is that good?
Yes.
Okay. So I am going to very quickly talk about an overview on donations management. Last week, I joined the East Bay hub of your area, and they gave me 3 hours to go over what we're going to do in about 45 minutes. So it might be a little fast talking. I do want to let you know the information on my screens here today. I will have a handout. I will email to Anna as soon as I'm done with this, and she can share that with you so you can have the basic bullet points of my presentation. So I want to start out by just talking about VOAD, really, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, began in 1970, and the whole idea was that individual organizations can't be expected to know everything about everything. And so by choosing areas of expertise, we can become experts in that area, but then we're going to cooperate with each other, do some communication so we can coordinate our activities that results in a collaboration. So it started out with 7 national organizations, and now it's up to 56 individual organizations. I think it's even gone up past that. So we are growing all the time, and it's much more efficient and effective to do that. So in the process, you'll notice Adventist Community Services was one of the founding members, and at that time we chose donations management as our primary expertise. So donations management, the distribution of emergency supplies, and we also provide emotional spiritual care. But donations management is where I've spent most of my time, so that's why I'm here to help you understand that particular topic. We do handle, as I said, the emotional spiritual care, but one of the things that makes us a little unique is being able to do management of multi-agency warehouses. So many nonprofit organizations have warehouses, but they aren't necessarily considered multi-agency warehouses. And when we say multi-agency warehouse, it doesn't mean a building where multiple agencies use that space for their warehousing, but it means one organization is going to manage all the goods in that space and will distribute to multiple agencies or organizations that have been vetted. So we're kind of the people that share all of our donations. So we do have on the national level agreements with the American Red Cross and with FEMA, and specifically FEMA, when there are issues around donations management, they usually will give us a call. And that usually means if there's going to be a multi-agency warehouse and a local jurisdiction wants support from FEMA, meaning money, they usually will call FEMA, and we're usually the ones around the country that will manage those multi-agency warehouses. So I want to start out when we're talking about donations management to actually show you some of what this can look like. And unless you've been out there and seen some of the issues, you may not understand how much work it is and how expensive it actually can be to manage those goods. So there is what we call stuff, and that's what most donations look like. It's surplus trash, useless to the frantic folk in the disaster area. There's an estimate that's been made that 40 to 60% of all of the in-kind donations or donations of items is unusable, not just undesirable, but unusable and needs to be discarded. So this happened to be a whole room at a church. They started collecting and it went clear to the ceiling. They ended up filling the entire room. That's not a very efficient way to support survivors. So we'll get whole 53-foot trailers full of things that are not sorted, labeled. We have no idea what is in those bags and boxes. And especially in an environment like we have now with the pandemic, we have no idea what we're exposing ourselves to when we're opening those bags and boxes. And the smell that comes out of some of them is just incredible. So there are whole truckloads that will show up like this. Here was in response to a fire in Texas. The hallways just stacked with boxes and bags. This was a faith-based group in a hallway, Joplin tornado, and their whole facility ended up looking like this. That event was the fastest I've ever seen donations like this show up. The tornado happened around dinner time in the evening, and by sunrise, there were piles of donations already showing up and thousands of volunteers trying to get in the city to help. So it was incredible. A fire in Northern California. There was a restaurant owner that said, oh, the senior center is full of donations. There's no room for any more. You can use my restaurant, because he was remodeling and it was empty, and ended up filling his restaurant with these bags and boxes. Here's another Northern California civic organization, and this isn't even a fifth or sixth of what they ended up collecting. In this case, they ended up collecting so much, they got tired after a few weeks and said, okay, we can't handle any more of this. They locked up their gates, they left, and one of the county supervisors drove by and said, oh no, this is a health hazard. County, you're gonna have to deal with this. And they ended up having to have California Conservation Corps teams come up. It took 4 teams, 10 days, just to pick it up and put it into bins that were 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. And they filled 626 of those bins. And the use of their labor ended up costing that county over $250,000 just to pick up the mess that was created from accepting the donations at this one location. And there were 14 locations in that county collecting these items for that particular fire. This was after Katrina. Can you imagine? There were many parking lots that looked like this. And it ended up that they had to send, dump trucks out in order to take all of this to the landfill. That is definitely not helpful to an economy that has been severely impacted by a disaster. This is definitely not the way to help survivors. So we want to do it much more efficiently than this. So what we end up doing is taking all of these in-kind donations and turn them from stuff into goods, which is the gleanings out of donated stuff. So in the disaster donations world, stuff now definitely has a meaning, and so do goods. So when you have donated goods, it doesn't include those bags of used clothing that are ripped and stained. It means the items that we can actually use or the survivors can use. And when we deal with donations, it can be used to support the operations of agencies, the responders, or to help support survivors that have been affected by the disaster. So here's an example of Northern California fire. There were lots of donations, but once they sorted through it, they were able to put together actual goods, and this happened to be a room where they had food where survivors could go in and pick up groceries. So here is the best message about donations management is actually cash is best is what we say because it's easy and people remember, but technically we want to say the best you can do is give a financial contribution to a trusted nonprofit organization. So a financial contribution to a trusted nonprofit organization, understanding that many different groups will pop, or individuals will pop up saying, we're helping these survivors, send me money to help support them. And then a week or 2 or 3 down the road, they disappear with $1 million that people donated to them. So we always want to vet the organizations that are receiving cash. And for government jurisdictions, you definitely want to make sure you vet the organizations. If you are going to refer people and say cash is best, the next question is, well, who do I give it to? So you want to make sure that you're vetting organizations and you make sure that they're not going to run off with the money. They understand how to equitably distribute without discrimination. So doing that vetting process, having that done before the disaster happened is really important. So why is cash the best thing that you can give? You can purchase exactly what's needed. It's amazing in the middle of summer that sometimes you'll get winter coats or you'll get Christmas decorations, things that are really not needed. So with money, you can purchase what is needed when it's needed. And if you purchase at that time, it's going to be fresh. So even things like toothpaste, if you buy it too far ahead, it'll turn into a brick. So you want to keep things fresh when you purchase, and especially things like perishable foods, definitely fresh is better. Also, it's much easier and cost-effective to transport money than it is to transport truckloads of products. And it does make it easier for your accounting, for documenting the donations. Also, if organizations get these donations of money from a variety of places, they can take all of that and do some bulk purchasing or wholesale purchasing, or some of the nonprofits have agreements with certain companies that even if they're not going to purchase a whole truckload, that they still can get wholesale or bulk pricing. Another good thing is that if you send the money to the disaster area, you can spend that money in the affected area that helps the economy of that area. I know it's nice to donate goods and give it to people, but sometimes businesses complain because all these people are not coming into my clothing store because you're giving everyone clothing. And so we have to consider that that local economy has been affected, and we don't want to disrupt that economy or to take away business from those businesses that really need it in this disaster. Also, nonprofits can provide tax-deductible receipts to donors, and it's very important to thank donors to make sure, especially if they're giving money, to let them know that that was a wonderful donation, it's very appreciated, and how flexible it is to use that kind of a donation to support people. You can equitably disperse money. It's a little easier to figure out how much you're giving to each family by giving them money, as opposed to, okay, this family needed personal care items, but this family needed furniture, or this family needs other things. To be equitable, money is the easiest way, a certain amount per person or per family. And we don't forget recovery, because often there's much more need during the recovery period than there is during response. It's interesting how government jurisdictions often can find money to handle mass care and response efforts up front. But there's not a lot of government funding that supports people when they're trying to rebuild their homes and during that recovery period. So money can, from the nonprofit perspective, be utilized to support recovery. And often it's going to be, let's use the money for building supplies when the volunteers can come in and donate their time instead of just necessarily hiring contractors to do all the work. So I want to take a look at what different parts of donations management looks like, because there isn't a facility that normally collects and warehouses and does distribution. Those are three things we usually like to separate. And I will tell you from my perspective, the best thing we can do to solve some of the donation management problems and to stop all of the stuff from showing up is to learn how to collect donations better. So if there's a disaster, people are going to collect all over the country or all over the world. Sometimes they're collecting donations. But there's some key things we'll talk about that should be considered when you're collecting. So even if you're not in the disaster area, you can help the people in the disaster area by collecting properly. So collections can happen everywhere, but typically will happen outside of the affected area because that's where people have the resources to give. If there is a multi-agency warehouse, it typically is just outside the impacted area. So it can be effective in getting goods quickly to the people that are affected, but not be in the middle of things where there might be problems with accessing that facility. And then within the disaster area, it's always nice to have multiple sites where there's distribution available. Unfortunately, no matter who you are that's doing distribution, there may be some people that do not want to go to your facility. Having options is always good for the survivors. Plus, they often have trouble getting to distribution sites because many times they lose their transportation. So if you can spread distribution sites out to a variety of neighborhoods, it does make it much more accessible to the survivors. And then there's also the options of mobile distribution. And we'll talk about all of these types of operations as we go on here. But you can see collections is outside the disaster area. The warehouse is going to be close, but not in the affected area usually. And then distribution is going to happen where it's going to be most accessible to the survivors that need that support. So here are some of the places. In fact, the picture on the bottom, I told you about that civic organization. They ended up filling 626 bins. You can see this was part of their driveway. Their entire driveway looked like this. The entire length of their driveway was full of these kinds of donations. On the top left was a youth center, and they started collecting things that initially they thought, oh, we'll hang up this rope and we can hang things on hangers, but so much came in that eventually they just started piling things in and then asked for help of how to get through that, how to sort it, how to make it available. And the top right is an example of what happens whenever you have a shelter. Donors think, aha, the survivors are at the shelter. That's where the people that need things are. I'm going to take my donations there. And so it's not unusual for shelters to end up with piles and piles of donations. Now, the collection centers are going to be most valuable when first, before collecting, they identify, is there a need for these donated items? There's sometimes where they don't need people to donate items. They're also going to figure out at the collection sites, how are they going to deliver that? You know, how are they going to transport it to the disaster area? And who is actually going to deliver it directly to the survivors? So they need to connect with an organization that will do the distribution and arrange to get those goods to the site where it's going to be distributed. And then only collect the things that are needed. Now, if they end up collecting things that are not needed in the disaster area, they could have a yard sale sell the things that are not needed in the disaster area, and then the money they make, they can send to the disaster affected area. Or if they wanted, they could have people do a donation, and it's specifically for a yard sale where all the proceeds go to the disaster area. But definitely they're going to accept items and not just send them randomly in odd bags and boxes. They should be sorted and then preferably put into boxes or containers, cartons that are sorted so only one type of item is in a box or a bin, and they're clearly labeled. So once it gets to the disaster area, we don't have to go through all of the boxes, the bins, and bags and try to figure out what's in it. So sorting it and make sure that it's labeled, but understand some items will need to be new. In most areas now, all clothing that is going to be distributed is new, but definitely, would you want to wear someone's used underwear? I don't think so. So things like socks and underwear need to be new, but some other things to consider, there are things like mattresses and linens that we have to be very careful of because of bed bugs. Also things like strollers, cribs, car seats. Those are in most jurisdictions are not going to be distributed unless they're new in their original boxes, because some of the issues about recalls and safety of those items. So if someone ends up donating a car seat, we don't know if it was in an accident. If an infant is put in that car seat, gets in an accident and was injured, they can say, well, I got this car seat from, and then there might be liability involved if someone gave them a used car seat that had already been damaged or had been recalled or something like that. So very careful when it comes to any equipment or anything for supporting, especially infants and toddlers, that sort of thing. Definitely you want to accept and send to a disaster things that are appropriate. If it's an area that's in the middle of winter, the t-shirts and the shorts aren't as valuable as maybe in this next picture you'll see winter coats, but if it's 110 degrees, they don't need winter coats. So consider where you're sending the donations, what time of year it is, and definitely don't assume you know what's going to be needed for a disaster, because sometimes they really don't need anything, and by sending things, you're only creating more problems for the area. So if you do collect things like clothing, you might have to take the clothing and put it into big bins. Sometimes we have locations, especially in Texas, that will take used clothing, and all year long, 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, they have folks that will take these big bins, and they actually have washers and dryers, and they will launder the clothes, check it to make sure the zippers work, they're all the buttons, they're not stained, that they're in good shape, and then they will actually make up clothing packs that include pants, shirts, socks, and underwear, and they put it in a plastic bag that then goes into a trailer, goes into boxes already sorted. So if people need clothing, you can just hand them a pack of clothing, and it makes it much easier. But imagine doing all of this in the middle of a disaster, in a disaster area where you probably have no washers and dryers or facilities or personnel to sort through this. So doing that ahead of time is much more valuable, but the used clothing is very time consuming. So we say in almost every disaster, please don't send or collect plastic bags or boxes full of miscellaneous items. And we usually don't need used clothes or bottled water for any event. And people are surprised when we mention the bottled water. Used clothing is a different thing, because every disaster, used clothing comes out of the woodwork from everywhere. It shows up in piles and piles. But the water, everyone knows water is needed. However, water is always available. I don't know of any disaster where there hasn't been more than enough water. As an example, after Flint, Michigan had their issue with water, you remember that the whole city didn't have potable water. And so they needed lots of water. One single donation of water was made to Flint specifically to provide bottled water to students at school. So it's donated to schools. That donation was 197 truckloads of water. There were many, many other donations that were each 27 truckloads of water. And we were getting donations of individual bottles and one case or a half a case. And trying to handle water, if you've ever tried to do it, is not an easy task because water comes in all different shapes and sizes, and you take 6 ounces or 8 ounces or 20 ounces and try to move that around by the truckload or a whole warehouse full. You'll see in the bottom right corner there, we end up with a lot of water, but if you have different size water, how do you move that around? What we end up doing is having to put it into a pallet box, which is 4 foot by 4 foot. But water bottles, if you notice, the plastic is pretty thin. And if you start piling it into a pallet box because water's heavy, you get about half full of that box and it starts crushing the bottles at the bottom and it starts leaking and making a mess everywhere. So water can often be obtained through private sector donations by the truckload. So individual bottles and cases is not usually a very good thing to send. So some of the precautions when you're collecting, especially in a pandemic, wearing gloves and face masks, and sometimes now even wearing gowns to protect yourselves from being infected or soiled. You have to discreetly discard unusable items. And I say that because there are going to be lots of items that need to be discarded, but be discreet. You don't want to put your dumpster right outside next to the front door of where you're collecting and have people see all of the things going into the dumpster. You want to do it in the back end and make sure that the dumpsters are emptied regularly, because even if you've been collecting for a week or 2 or 3 or a month, and it's taken that long to fill the dumpster, if people see a dumpster that's full or overflowing, they're going to think everything's going into that dumpster. So make sure they're kept regularly emptied and do it discreetly. Now, transitioning to the multi-agency warehouse, we're talking facilities that usually are 100,000 to 250,000 square feet. The average Walmart, not a super center, is going to be 80 to 100,000 square feet probably. So we're talking about buildings that are like a Walmart building or something larger. In the case of 9/11, Adventist Community Services, or ACS, we had 4 warehouses, and one of those warehouses, we ended up using 800,000 square feet of that 1 million square foot building. It's amazing how much space it takes sometimes to deal with these donations. And the warehouse is not intended to serve survivors directly. Just imagine survivors walking into a building that's 800,000 square feet and they see all the things being donated, and then they're going to want to say, why can't you give me any more than you're giving me? You know, why can't I fill up my pickup truck full? We have to be careful. Most of the time we're not looking at something that large, but people that have lost everything really need things, but sometimes we don't have enough to give everybody as much as they would like to have. So we have to make sure, if we're equitable in our distribution, that everyone gets the same amount. So we have to make sure that we can support as many of those folks as possible. So sometimes we have to say, we're only going to give 1 outfit of clothes per person because we may not have enough clothes to distribute more than that to each person. These warehouses sometimes will take 100 or more volunteers per day to sort through all of the stuff that shows up. It is incredible. The warehouses, unfortunately, because the items are not collected and sorted when they're collected properly, it comes into the warehouse in big piles, and we end up having to spend the majority of our operations sorting through donations. So when I said if things are collected properly, we really could avoid a lot of the work that's done at the warehouse if it comes in already sorted and labeled. It is definitely important to document the donations that are being given. And I don't think we have time to talk about donated resources when it comes to public assistance policies with federal declarations. But if we document the donations that are being sent, as well as our volunteer hours to handle those donations, or any volunteer hours for that matter, it can mean a tremendous amount of money that a local or state jurisdiction does not have to pay for those disaster operations. So generally what happens in a federal declaration, FEMA takes care of 75%, and the remaining 25% is paid for by the state and local government. In California, usually of the 25% that go to the state and the county, 25% of the 25%, which ends up being 6.25%, is usually pushed down to the county level. So it can get very expensive to a county or a state. After the Joplin tornado, they did so well in documenting that they were able to be credited for $17.7 million of the donated resources and volunteer hours, which was basically like 99% of their cost. So they didn't have to fork out a lot of that money. They were able to take advantage of the documentation they did for the donated resources. So it can be extremely valuable to your local affected economy. So from the warehouse, the shipments can be prepared to go out to vetted distribution sites, making sure that the people doing the distribution of those products are going to do it without discrimination and do it equitably and not just run off with it. There was a time we had a warehouse, and we usually will work with the government jurisdiction to vet the organizations that are going to receive the goods. Typically, it'll include any of the VOAD organizations, but others are going to be vetted. And we had a request from a faith-based group that said they were helping survivors at their church, and they ordered, it ended up being like 4 pallets worth of things. And we said, no one has really vetted them yet. And we found out that a family of 4 was staying in their building, but they were trying to fill their shelves for their general operations. They wanted food to have for their potlucks and for other initiatives they had that were not going to assist particularly the disaster survivors, but just in general, those who were in need. And we have to be careful with donated items to consider the intent of the donors. In a disaster, we're going to expect that those donations are used to help in disaster response. So here's an example of an empty, used to be a Walmart building that we used in Katrina. Loading docks. Sometimes we've had up to like 20 loading docks. You definitely want to have at least 2 loading docks. It really helps if you have some loading docks coming in and some going out. And I'll just mention, if you look on the far left there behind the cars, there's a whole bank of porta potties. This particular warehouse was in New York after Superstorm Sandy. It was open just about Thanksgiving, was open for 3 months, which meant it was over the winter. This was right before it snowed, but we eventually had snow, and this building was set for demolition, which meant it had electricity, but it had no running water, no climate control, and so it was basically freezing in the warehouse, and because of no running water, we were using porta potties in the freezing cold in the winter. It was really not a pleasant situation. But sometimes that's the only building that's available. This is what we like to see with donations, things that have been organized, palletized, stretch wrapped. You can move it much faster with a forklift. A truckload of items like this that's palletized, you can unload in 15 to 30 minutes, where that first picture I showed you, a truckload of plastic bags and boxes, that truck ended up taking at least a dozen volunteers 2 hours to unload, because you have to move every box and bag individually, and it's very time consuming. These are the things we like to see. There was a private sector donation of whole pallets of Clorox, and you may see at the top, when you understand how to do these multi-agency warehouses, understanding if this is a Walmart, Walmart doesn't even open operations in a matter of 3 or 4 days or 2 or 3 days. Trying to get operations like this up and running and organized so you can find things that come in, takes some doing. ACS has a whole numbering system for inventory so that once we number it, if you put things in order, everything with a 700 number are going to be cleaning supplies. So we know if we put in a numerical order, all the cleaning supplies will be in the same place in the warehouse, and all the clothing will be in the same place, and all the food will be in the same place. So it automatically is going to help you organize your warehouse. So understanding some of those things, if you don't know ahead of time, can be quite daunting a task to organize this kind of an operation. Imagine this is maybe a quarter of what was in this warehouse. All of this is unsorted donations. And understanding what it would be like to sort through all of this. Some of it was put in boxes and palletized just so we could move it around easier than by individual boxes. But it does take quite an operation. So it is a good idea for jurisdictions to understand that this is a big task and something the government usually doesn't have the know-how or the personnel to handle, that you want to make sure in your planning you have a plan to scale up your operations in case you have to do this, that you have an agreement with someone that knows how to take care of these kinds of things. So here is a sorting area. You can see in the very back, once it's sorted, it can be stacked after it's palletized. Everything on the right of this picture is unsorted, but on the left is a sorting process where there are all these tables with boxes that are labeled. And we actually used shopping carts and did what they called reverse shopping. You empty the unsorted boxes and bags into a cart, and we went up and down these tables on the left. And as we got to the right box, we took it out of the cart and put it into the box. Once the box is full, you tape it up and then put it on a pallet with the same kinds of items. Once the pallet's full, you can stretch wrap it and then put it in the storage area in the warehouse. This was Superstorm Sandy, very cold of how things looked once things were sorted and organized. And here is one of the few warehouses that we've had in California. This was San Diego. And we were lucky. In this case, almost everything that came in was already palletized. And because of that, we were able to run this warehouse for 3 months. It took a whole 4 of us to run this warehouse. It didn't take 100 people to sort through things and everything for a long period of time. So it is much more efficient and much nicer to have a warehouse where everything comes in already sorted. Now, when it comes to distribution of those items, this is not a pod. It's going to serve survivors, but it's not goods that are acquired by a government organization. You're going to provide emergency supplies. There's a list. It could be in a gym, a church fellowship hall, storefront, a lot of options, but this is where it's going to go to give to survivors. Considerations at those distribution sites may be how accessible is a site to the survivors? Is there a curfew that you have to abide by? I already mentioned having multiple sites so that it's more accessible to survivors, making sure there's equitable, non-discriminatory distribution. And for donations, you need to document, 501c3s have to say where the goods donated to them are actually being distributed. So documenting the families and what items they get. Having sometimes drive-through or no-touch distribution. And there may be a need for PPE for those volunteers. An example of this was in a mall of a distribution site. On the top right is a civic organization doing distribution. On the top left was the outside with the sign of what you see on the bottom, which ended up being a storefront that used to sell appliances. And it was set up where people could come in and choose the shirts and the pants and so forth that they were going to receive, but they did have a certain limit of how many outfits of clothes a certain individual could have. If you do this, where people can come in and select, because they also had tents, sleeping bags, linens, cleaning supplies, you want to make sure that people just don't go in and grab everything they want, that you have escorts with them to document what they're receiving to make sure that it's an appropriate amount and that they're not making a mess of your distribution center. Here's an example. Sometimes it has to be a tent. but remember that security might be an issue if you have a tent. A lot of people would think about coming in and just stealing things, so you do have to make sure it's secured so they don't disappear on you. Mobile distribution, you may want to deliver to isolated areas, or if it takes a long time to get access to the area, it might be easier to take a trailer and do mobile distribution than to have every survivor take a circuitous route or have. And this would be for areas where maybe there's no other service available. They may have lost their transportation, so they can't get to you. Or sometimes families don't want to leave their property because if they leave, they're afraid of vandals coming, either destroying things or stealing things from their property. You may want to set it up as a drive-through, especially in a pandemic setting. And if you do mobile distribution, having prepackaged kits, like a cleaning kit with all the necessary supplies, or a personal hygiene kit, or a clothing pack, makes it much easier and quicker to do distribution if you're doing mobile distribution. And consider as a drive-through or no touch. So an example here, I recently was distributing, basically it's kitchen in a box. With the pandemic, we had people drive up, pop the trunk, and we put it in for them. On the bottom right, there were no buildings to do distribution in Saipan after a typhoon. So we lined up several pickup trucks and cars and put the products in the back of the pickup truck or in the trunk of the car, and the survivors drove their cars by the back of this line of vehicles, and as they came by, somebody walked with them with a clipboard and asked them, do you need soap and shampoo, or do you need paper towels? As they went by the vehicles, they handed what was in the back of that particular truck or car to them and then noted it on a sheet of paper. So sometimes you have to get innovative of how you're going to do distribution. And if there's no building or no tent that you can put up, you just find an open space. And, you know, this is the way we did it in Saipan. There are possibilities of even using distribution trailers. On the top are a couple of ours. On the bottom is one that Texas has that they do specifically clothing packs. We're running out of time, but I'm just going to run quickly through these slides. Like I said, this information is going to be in a handout that Anna will have. So it is an ideal thing to have what's called a volunteer and donations coordination task force that's going to include whoever's identified as a volunteer or donations manager, government departments, which might include logistics or general services, definitely your public information officers, so they can help with messaging. The VOAD, because often they're involved with phone banks or a warehouse or have access to resources or would know what the needs of the community are. You want to incorporate, if you have a volunteer reception center or emergency volunteer center or whatever you want to call that, someone that understands where volunteer resources might be, as well as a business operations center or whoever's working with the private sector. Because if you can get truckloads of water, that's much better than having to deal with the bottles and cases. And this can happen, having this kind of a task force at a city, county, state, or federal level. Some of their activities would be implementing a plan, if there is a donations plan. This team would be gathering intelligence on what the needs are of that disaster and what the available resources are, and matching those things, matching the needs to wherever the resources may be. Also vetting organizations that are receiving either money or the donated goods, and helping develop the messages, because messaging to the public is critical to do, and there's more information we could give you on that, but don't have time. And definitely this task force is going to encourage having agreements with people that will understand how to do equitable distribution or would be running or managing your warehouse, those kinds of things. So messaging is important. The VDCTF is going to help gather that information, confirm the needs, and what's not needed is just as important as what is needed. So you don't want the used clothes piling up. Making sure you monitor and utilize social media to get your message out. And the messages can be pre-scripted, meaning write messages before disasters and account for the different types of disasters. And then when a disaster hits, you can review it and make minor edits, but you already have something written that has all of the components you want in your messaging. Messaging should be ongoing and updated. If you send a message out that says, we need something, you better be willing to accept truckloads of it. If you only need a dozen rakes and shovels, you're not going to want the public to get that message, or you might get truckloads of them. And then you might still be getting them down the road, because if they don't have an ongoing updated message, they're going to make the note, put it on the refrigerator, and a few weeks down the road, oh, they needed this, and send it maybe after the need has already been taken care of. And everyone needs to give the same consistent message, whether it's VOAD or government at every level or the business sector or media. Make sure that the same message goes out so people will listen to the right message. If conflicting messages go out, people are going to listen to the message they want to hear. So if one group says, I'm collecting everything, we're not going to turn away any donations, people are going to go and give there rather than listen to our message that says, we don't need the used clothing because we can't launder that. You know, we want new clothing. So be careful that you're consistent. And you can use web pages, which can be developed ahead of disasters and kept dark and then only modified briefly before they go public. So they can have links to organizations that are going to collect money or links to people who are assisting. Lots of information can be set on a web page before an event. One example, messaging with social media. One social media post after Sandy Hook shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, all the surviving children need a teddy bear to hug. They ended up, you see the teddy bear that's bigger than I am. They ended up with 1,009 of those teddy bears. That doesn't include all of the other smaller stuffed plush toys, the games, the puzzles, the school supplies, the personal hygiene items. We ended up palletizing 6 feet tall, all of this after it was sorted, and filled 20,000 square feet. It was incredible. So watch what you ask for. If you ask, you might get a lot more than you want. Information management, just be sure computers now and software can be used to facilitate financial contributions, to document your donated resources, keep inventory, capture volunteer services, and sometimes can even be used as a virtual warehouse. So people can go to some software and say, I have this to offer, and then organizations can look in the background and say, oh, I can use that offer, and it goes directly from the donor to that organization instead of all these donations going into a big warehouse and then being sent out. So you don't have to handle it twice. So the virtual warehouse can be done with software as well, and sometimes it can be used to post the actual needs of a voluntary organization. So, and you know, planning, include donations in your plans, or often it's in an annex. Promote the agreements, definitely want to educate and train, exercise, activate the plans, and always be in a regular system of reviewing, revising the plans, and repeat, including recovery. And I think for now, I have said enough, and that's a little bit more than I think Anna was expecting, but back to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Charlene. That was not more. In fact, I hope it left many of you wanting more. As you can see, Charlene is just an incredible wealth of information. And she, I think when we first talked, she said, I could do this in 15 minutes. I could do it in 3 hours. I could do it in 3 days. How much do you want to talk about donations management? So I want to be, I want this to really feel like your workshop for all of the participants on the line. Charlene, there were 2 or 3 questions that came in, and let's just go ahead and go to those right now. Okay. 2 of them had to do with documentation and kind of in the same vein. Can you talk with us a little bit about what does documentation look like? Do you have examples or samples most specifically around things that relate to inventory, sorting, and distribution? Do you have tools that you might be able to share with us?
Most of the nonprofit organizations, as long as you're documenting for distribution, who it is you're distributing to, so like the name of the family, most of them want to capture the address they had at the time of the disaster to make sure that they were in an affected area, and then an address or contact information where they are staying now in case they want to give them any additional information or check in with them if they have any ongoing needs. But as long as you document what it was you gave them, you will not, however, attach dollar values to donations because it is not acceptable for a nonprofit to give a value, a monetary value to any donation that comes to them. That is up to the donor to assign a value, or in the case of donated resources, the government jurisdiction that is going to take that information and put it into a project worksheet in order to be able to submit it to FEMA for that cost share, they will have a mechanism for determining what a fair market value would be. But if the information of what was donated is given to the local jurisdiction, then they can put a price on that. There are some forms that some places in California, counties have shared with their VOAD partners that can help them document the items that are donated or to capture the volunteer hours, because there is specific information that needs to be captured. If you don't have anything in your counties, I do have some generic forms, especially for volunteer management. One of the things that is not always captured is a job assignment, because it is crucial. FEMA will not consider accounting for that volunteer's time unless they know what the volunteer did, because not all work would be acceptable as part of the public assistance policy. So recently, the Northern California fires, an example, a nonprofit said they were doing debris removal. Well, FEMA said, what kind of debris removal? Because we know in California with fires, if someone had their home destroyed by a fire and that county said now that all of the ash and the debris left is considered hazardous material, they don't want you digging in the ash and sifting through things. So the volunteer hours that were spent sifting through the ash is not acceptable for those hours. But if they went out and their chainsaw teams were clearing trees that downed or that kind of debris removal, that was acceptable, assignments. So you have to tell them what you were doing in order for it to be determined whether it meets the criteria to be acceptable for the cost share. As far as donated goods, sometimes it's as simple as submitting the bill of lading that comes with a truckload. So if a truck is delivering a truckload of palletized water, it's very easy. All you have to do is submit the bill of lading and say a truckload of water, and it will tell you how much water that was, how many pallets or whatever. That's enough to document. But there are forms that can be included that says, how much and what quantity, what unit of measure, because you can't say 10 without saying 10 cases, boxes, pallets, or truckloads of items. So as long as you describe what the item is in enough detail that they would be able to assign a monetary value.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And Marcia, did that answer your question? I know you had something. Okay. And let's see. Francie, you also had a question more directly about the warehousing. Do you want to come off mute, Francie, and ask your question directly?
Yeah, I've just been talking to some groups in Santa Cruz County that are looking to find a warehouse for a long-term recovery plan. And they've kind of identified a couple places and they just didn't know where to go next for, help and partnership in that. So would FEMA be the appropriate first step?
Usually FEMA will not support warehouses for recovery. When it comes to their involvement, usually it's under the public assistance policy, which is going to help during response efforts. But usually the support for FEMA funding goes away once you get into recovery. So unfortunately, when it comes to long-term recovery, most places are looking at an organization that would be willing to manage those operations. But in some cases, instead of doing what's a multi-agency warehouse, is they will get space if multiple groups are comfortable in sharing the space, of having resources in the same place and, just sharing whatever cost there is. That's going to be up to a long-term recovery committee and what they're willing to support, whether they have dollars to pay for a lease or renting facilities, or whether they can get donated facilities or even donations of equipment. And then even when you're talking equipment, who is going to take the liability of, for instance, the use of forklifts or pallet jacks? Because what are the policies around who can operate those forklifts and who has the liability? When you have a warehouse, usually with multi-agency warehouses, the managing organization will take the liability for the volunteers. So if there's a volunteer injured, but usually the government jurisdiction takes the liability for the building and the contents that are in them. So you're going to have to consider who is willing, if you do have a warehouse for everyone, who is willing to take the liability for the building, the contents, any equipment, or liability for volunteers or staff.
Well, I'm wondering if they are still in the response period now, I believe. So would FEMA maybe help them establish something that could be turned over when FEMA, when it goes to the long-term recovery?
That's something to consider. Typically, with public assistance, they need to make a request within a fairly short period of time after the event begins. And definitely, the way FEMA works in general, before FEMA gets involved, there has to be a request by the state. In order for the state to get involved, there needs to be a request from the county. So if the county says we need a warehouse for response efforts, and they request it of the state, and the state feels that the county and the state can't handle that, they can ask for FEMA support. But if there is a warehouse opened, I would just be very leery that before you ever even open anything like that, that if FEMA's going to be expected to support, they need to be involved in the decision-making before you ever get the facility and open it. FEMA must be part of the decision-making process. So you definitely want to have the county be supportive of it in order to ask for state support and then for FEMA support. There's a whole process to go through if you want the FEMA dollars. And I would say do it if there is a federal declaration. You don't want to leave money available to your local jurisdiction if you can get it from the state or FEMA.
Would Adventist services be willing to help them with this or mentor them?
That would be a possibility, and definitely, if nothing else, I'm often called by states, counties, FEMA, nonprofits for information. If I can help you offline, I'm happy to do that. And maybe we don't have to take as much time here, but certainly you could reach out and I can help you offline.
Okay, I'll give them your contact. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Charlene. If you'll stand by, because there may be other questions. But
hey, Anna, I just wanted to say hi to Charlene. Do you remember me? I was in a class with you in Southern California. We were.
Who is that?
Jennifer. We took a class to help build our presenter skills, and you and I were in a class.
Ah.
I just wanted to say hi.
Hi. Okay, now yes, I see a lot of people all over the state. I have a 5-state territory: California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Hawaii, and I deploy all over the country. I've served in 40 states and territories. So yes, sometimes I apologize. I don't remember everybody I meet and work with.
It's all good. Thank you.
And I am putting my email, I'm putting into the chat box.
Okay, wonderful. So let's move to the next segment of what we plan for today's dialogue, and that's what you see up on the screen. So who works in this arena in our South Bay Hub? And as Charlene was talking, I did a little analysis of who actually dialed in today. And a majority of you are from Santa Clara County. We do have a couple of you from the South part of the hub, Luna with Monterey County OES and Calissa with United Way Monterey. So if Luna and Calissa will hold tight with us, and then I know that we also have Mika joining from Sacramento area. But what I wanted to go to next was, because the rest of the participants are from organizations or government within Santa Clara County, I wanted to talk a little bit about cadre and the way in which this works in Santa Clara County for donations management. And so for those of you who aren't as familiar with Cadre, as I said at the opening remarks, we are the local VOAD for Santa Clara County, and it's that VOAD is the network of nonprofits that work together in coordination with government when we have an event or an emergency and try and figure out what are the community's needs, what are the various resources from our nonprofits, our community and faith-based organizations, particular to that event. So whether that was in 2017, the floods that impacted 3 neighborhoods in San Jose, to 7 months ago when the pandemic was first impacting us here in Santa Clara County, to the wildfires that just happened in the last 6 or 8 weeks or so. So pause. The way this happens in Santa Clara County with our local VOAD is we have a team approach, a team structure, and there are a number of teams that are in existence already that have formulated. Our teams for Cadre focus on things like access and functional needs, and that's led by our Independent Living Center. We have a team that focuses on food sourcing and distribution, led by Second Harvest Silicon Valley. Mass Care is led by the American Red Cross. Ann Heresy is on the line today. With that, we have an immigrant relations team led by Francie Collins, who's also here today. We have a casework and case management team led by Catholic Charities. I am extremely pleased to have with us today our team lead for Santa Clara County's donations management team, which is whose photo you see on the side and whose camera you hopefully see on your screen. That's Trish Dorsey. And we're going to give Trish a moment to talk a little bit about what she does with us locally in Santa Clara County. So let me give you an intro for Trish. Trish is the Vice President of Mission Services for Goodwill Silicon Valley. She has a long history of working in both retail and nonprofit organizations. She joined Goodwill in 1996 at Goodwill of the Central Coast, so those of you a little bit south of us, and moved to Goodwill Silicon Valley in 2002 and has been in her current role as the Vice President since 2004. Trish believes strongly in the work Goodwill does to help people help themselves to start on the path for self-sufficiency. She serves on several committees in Silicon Valley that support providing opportunities to those in need. And I think without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Trish and let her share a little bit more of her thoughts on donations management, disasters, coordination for Cadre in Santa Clara County.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here this afternoon. I apologize for jumping in so late. Somehow I had it on my calendar as starting at 2, so apologies. But glad to have made it in time for my intro. So what I wanted to talk about experience really more than anything around donations management and how it has happened within Santa Clara County and how Goodwill kind of floated to the center, if you will, of donations management as we need to. So first of all, I just want to make it really clear that Goodwill, unlike some other organizations, Salvation Army, I think, is very much in disaster recovery as part of their mission. Goodwill's mission is to help marginalized populations that have barriers to employment to become gainfully employed, which is very different from disaster management. However, we also have the infrastructure to be helpful when we do have disasters that require management of donations. And so what our process has now become, and I'm going to talk quite a bit probably about reflecting on the flood, because that's when we first jumped in, and that was a great experience in terms of learning. So you know, when we do have another disaster, I think we're going to be even that much more prepared because of that experience. The what happens, as I'm sure everyone on this phone knows, when there's a disaster, people go to their closets and they say, how can I help? And the way in which they feel that they are being most helpful is they know that people have lost their household goods. They know that people have lost their clothing. And so they go and dig for things that they think may be useful. And in some cases, they go to find things that they just really, quite frankly, want to get rid of. And they put them all into a big black bag and they load them up in their car and they drive them to where they think is the place to go to, where what they believe will happen is they will drive in, drop off their bag of donations, and then they assume that someone is going to sort through that bag of donations, identify the sizes, the gender, and all of those pieces, and then separate it out so that when someone who has been impacted by that disaster can walk in the door and say, I'm Trish Dorsey, I'm a size 10, and I need a pair of jeans. And they're going to be able to go straight to that pair of jeans that are just right for Trish Dorsey. That's what people think happens. What happens is not that. What happens is we get inundated with bags of donations. Again, all good intentions. And what we found to be the best possible solution to this is we gather those donations. Goodwill steps in and says, okay, let's use our infrastructure. We've got the trailers that we can load up. We've got our donation collection centers. We've got our stores where people can take donations. And let's invite those donations to us. Let me back up for a minute. We try also to put a message out to our community that this is not, what's really helpful now is not necessarily material donations. And so we try to curb it a bit, but that may or may not help. I don't know. I know that we still continue to get a lot of donations. And so with that, we take these donations and again, using our infrastructure, what we found to be the most useful way of doing this is to just incorporate those donations straight into our regular stream of donations that we get on a regular basis. And so they all go in through that regular process. These donations end up in the stores, people purchase them. The way that the donation becomes useful to the people who are impacted by the disaster is that in turn, Goodwill will distribute, in what we've done in the past is through Red Cross, vouchers for people who have been impacted to come into our stores and find what they need. And so we believe that that gives that person a broader choice of product to choose from, because it's not limited just to the donations that came in through because of the disaster. And it gives them an opportunity to find what they need, not what just is available through those donations, but what they need. They need household goods, they need clothing, they need even personal like toiletries, which we have available in our stores. And so we think that what we're doing is we are taking the donations in, we're investing in the sorting through them and all of the logistics that go with that. They land out in our stores, as does every donation, but the value then is we sell them, we get that money. That money is turned into vouchers, which is then handed out through the Red Cross to people. So our biggest challenges, I think, have been, first, as I mentioned, first of all, is trying to get the message out that the donation is not necessarily the best resource for you to provide to the community at this point. And then the other message is when people do bring their donations in and they anticipate that their pair of jeans is going to go to Trish Dorsey, who lost her house, that they need to understand that that's not the case, and not we want people to understand that there is a benefit to what they're doing, but it is not, help me out here, Anna. it's just, people get soured and they think, gosh, I thought my genes were going to go to that person who was going to, had a fire. It's just not possible. And so where we need the help when these things happen is in helping us to get that message out so that people are understanding, and it doesn't, we're stepping in and trying to do the right thing, and that people understand that that's exactly what we're doing, and that we're not just turning these donations into money and then keeping it. So that's our biggest challenge. But we do have the trucks, and we do have the warehouses, and we do have the staff, and we do have the desire to help during those disaster times, and we will continue to do that. So I'll pause at that point. I've said a lot. Take any questions anyone might have or comments.
Sure. Thank you, Trish. And for our Santa Clara County audiences, Trish is with Goodwill. We also have a relationship with our team for the Salvation Army to do pretty much the same thing that Trish explained. And it was an agreement in Santa Clara County between the two organizations that they were going to share. Trish was going to run point, and she's got her contacts at the Salvation Army so that they can back one another up and offer the same resource. So there's Salvation Army vouchers as well that become available if through a disaster in our local community to handle that goodwill intention of folks donating used household goods and clothing. And so I want to pause there. If you have a question about Santa Clara County's team structure, how we're handling in-kind donations, or if you have a question even about financial donations and how that's managed in Santa Clara County, I think you have some folks on today's line that could answer that question. I want to ask Jennifer and Norma represent two of our local jurisdictions. Jennifer Ponce and Norma, do either of you have any questions on this topic about how things are structured, or any of the information shared by Charlene or Trish that would help you in kind of coordinating on the issue if and when it impacts your communities? So Jennifer and Norma, you're both on mute, you're both off camera.
I'm very well versed in the opportunities and the positive impact that Cadre has on our community. I know in the recent evacuations we did here in Morgan Hill, I was frustrated because I wasn't able to take the time to pay attention to the things that Cadre was offering. And that was frustrating to me. So that's definitely something I need to work on, or assign someone in my EOC to reach out to you. I'm very impressed with all the information that Charlene and Trish have shared with us. It's just remarkable what you both do, and I'm just grateful that you're here for us.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Norma, not sure if you have any comments. There you go, unmuted. Wonderful. Norma, did you have a comment? We can't hear you if you're speaking. Okay, maybe use the chat box if you have a comment you want to share. I want to open the floor to some of the other nonprofits that are here. Linda with SourceWise, I think you had a question about documentation. We did cover that. I'm not sure if you had any follow-up questions to that, or Nathan, Tracy, if you're still with us, if you have questions, or Hartono, I think you're here representing yourself from Los Altos. I'm not sure if you have a particular question or comment or resource you want to offer up to the group.
Thanks, Anna. No, this is my, actually, I work with our city's emergency preparedness coordinator, Ann Happenstall. And she said that this would be a useful class for us, the emergency preparedness volunteer. So, all this, what I'm hearing today is all new, and it's all very good for me, very educational. So thank you for putting this together.
Okay. So I want to go to Luna and Calissa, and maybe we'll start with you, Calissa. Do you have any questions or comments or experiences you can share from our South Bay Hub communities of Monterey or any of your closer peers in Santa Cruz and San Benito?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. And just like what was just shared, I came into this position in June, so I'm still learning. But this has been really valuable to learn a lot more about how to coordinate during a disaster, especially when we think about on the ground donations. And I was able to go back. I represent United Way, Monterey County, and talk to some of our different staff people about the work that we've done and just kind of reflect on what has been really key when thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think in terms of the different donation management that we've been able to do, I think it's a little bit different than what's been shared here today, because we've been able to leverage a lot of relationships and kind of help connect pieces. So for example, we were able to help an ag initiative reach local food banks and also the Boys and Girls Club. So it's a little bit different instead of direct handling of those donations, but I think a really important layer. And so it was great to hear about, this kind of more on the ground approach, especially thinking about since we've been able to do it in a different way. But thank you so much for sharing.
Okay, thank you, Calissa. Luna, any thoughts or comments? Oops, Luna, we're not hearing you either. Let's see. You're not muted. Ah, the joys of technology for us. Oh, so Norma's saying her speakers didn't work, and so she's sorry, but she was really appreciative of the presentation and the information that was shared. So that's a comment for you, Trish and Charlene. Sorry, we're having microphone problems for Norma, and maybe so for Luna as well. So Mika, any questions from the Sacramento region?
None so far. I'm just listening. Thank you. I'm learning a lot.
Okay, wonderful. Glad to have you with us. And so, all right, well, let's keep going then. We have about 6 minutes left, and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. And so we had kind of allotted some time to talk about all the different communities that we have here in Santa Clara County. We were doing our question slide just kind of interspersed throughout. And Luna's saying, sorry, not sure why my mic's not working. The joys of virtual webinars and meetings, right? Luna and I were talking earlier this week about just my mantra lately, just to share with all of you, is hashtag COVID tired. Sometimes things just don't work the way you thought they were going to work for you. So what I have for you, I think in the last 5 minutes, I want to let Charlene give a couple of closing thoughts, but before that, let me tell you what's coming up next, and then we'll end with some thoughts on donations management, where you might want to go next in your local planning and coordination. So for us as Cadre, as your coordinator of your community preparedness series that's funded by UASI, what you have up on the screen here is what remains of our South Bay Hub series of workshops. We are right here today at donations management. In 2 weeks, we will be doing a session on CBO and government coordination. And I realized I picked the wrong graphic. These two are flip-flopped. The morning is going to be incident command system for nonprofits. The afternoon will be CBO and government coordination for the Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito County fire area. Yes, well, you guys were fire areas, but for those 3 counties. And then on November 5th is our last training day. We'll be covering agency emergency planning and personal preparedness for staff and volunteers in nonprofit and community programs. We are also offering some technical assistance open forums for any of you who are doing emergency and disaster planning for your own organizations. Those are on the first Fridays of each month, and you're welcome to join us. What you see in the far left corner is a little QR code. That's to keep our funders happy. If you wouldn't mind taking out your phone and holding your camera up to that little QR code, it's just a short little participant eval. It keeps our funders happy. If you would please do that. If you would please fill that out. I also sent you the link in the email that had today's login. So if you don't want to do it off your phone, you're welcome to do it by clicking the link in your email. We have 2 upcoming trainings that we want you to know about. As I talked about being COVID tired, tomorrow we are offering a self-care for nonprofit and our government partners. You're welcome to join as well. 12 ways to deal with stress and anxiety. It's being led by IsraAid, and a new partner that we found through our NorCal VOAD meeting. And so 12 ways to deal with stress and anxiety tomorrow over your lunch break. And then next Thursday, we have secured Dr. Marty Fensterscheib from County Public Health to give an update. I think a lot of you know in Santa Clara County, our orders are about to change as of Wednesday, October 14th. So Dr. Fensterscheib will be talking with our nonprofit sector about what that means, be there to answer questions, address any concerns we have about the upcoming cold and flu season on top of COVID, keeping our workforce well, etc. And so let me let Charlene get the last few words in of, if you had a crystal ball, you had a words of wisdom for us to close out our thoughts on disaster donations management.
Right. Number 1, cash is best. Definitely encouraging people to give cash for the reasons that we talked about. It's really much easier and efficient. But the next thing would definitely be to plan. Don't expect that donations management is not going to be an issue. You never know when all of a sudden an event and social media or the news media or something happens that all of a sudden you are totally inundated with miscellaneous stuff, the disaster donations that you may not want. It's great if we get private sector or good donations that can just be funneled directly to an organization that can use it. And in the pandemic, we've had less trouble because I think more people are understanding the issues about contaminated products, or they can't go out and do all the shopping, or aren't willing to wander out with their donated items. So there's been less issue around the pandemic, but you need to be prepared for those piles and piles and parking lots full of donations. I saw after the campfire, several parking lots full. No one asked for them. They will just show up, and you better plan to be ready for it. To have a team put together that includes the people that can sort it, that can do the warehousing, that can do the distribution. Even if you have a warehouse, one of the hardest things is understanding how to get it out of the warehouse. How do you get those products out, and who can do the distribution and not run off and sell things on the street corner? Making sure you definitely have partners that can scale up. It's not unusual. We often work with the Goodwill Salvation Army. Even Adventist Community Services has community service centers that are operating 24/7, and not only in disaster response, but once a disaster hits and you get inundated, organizations like that very easily become overwhelmed. So from a jurisdiction's point of view, being able to prepare for massive warehousing sometimes, if you haven't seen it before, doesn't mean it might not happen in the future. So plan, understand who it is you want at the table to work with you, to definitely put them in the plan, have the whole team be involved in the planning, have documents that you can already share with VOAD partners or nonprofit partners, that they can start from hour 1 documenting the volunteer hours and the donated resources. You can't make it up after the fact. If you're waiting a few days down the road to get those forms out, you've lost thousands, tens of thousands, millions of dollars sometimes. So having those forms available, and if you need some samples, I've worked with Cal OES and California Volunteers to try and create some that are very generic, but definitely the planning, have messages ready, because immediately you can message, please do not send your used clothing. We're still trying to identify the needs And in the meantime, you know, the best thing you can do is give money. People are going to want to give, so direct them to the money. But in the meantime, get the messages ready to be able to send to them that are gonna funnel what you need donated, that are gonna help educate people in proper donations. And even when it's not in the middle of a disaster, you can help other communities affected by disasters by keeping your ears open. If people are collecting everything and gonna send a whole truckload of plastic bags, maybe there's a kind way to say, can we help you sort this before it goes, or something like that, or have a yard sale and send the money. So we can help each other by being more proactive. So definitely planning and develop your team just like any other field in disaster response.
Okay.
And there is training available. So there is a volunteer and donations course that FEMA has created for the local level as well as one for state level. And those are available, the local level is available through CSTI.
Okay. Thank you so much, Charlene. Thank you, Trish, for joining us today. Sorry about the calendar mix-up, and we really appreciate everybody who has logged in today. We will be sharing back out to all of the registrants the PowerPoint notes that Charlene will be providing to us. And from there, if you have an interest in hearing more topics, doing another series of talking to our community preparedness partners in West Bay. That's coming up on October 21st. She'll be doing another segment focused on the San Francisco and San Mateo County audiences, but you're all welcome to join in there if today just whet your appetite and you want to know more. So that would be a session. It's on the BayTEP website where you signed up for today, and that'll be 90 minutes on Wednesday, the 21st by Charlene, and another 30 minutes the next day as they segue into their local planning conversation. So with that, I think I'm going to let you guys all go. Thank you for your time, and thanks for logging in, and we'll look forward to seeing you at one of our future sessions, we hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.